I believe in building culture. And so everywhere I go, I'm trying to build a team and build culture that's based on love, not fear. 1 John 4:19 says, love can't coexist with fear because fear has to do with punishment. So what does it mean to me to be a cultural catalyst is to be the catalyst of building a culture that's based on love. As simple as that.
Well, welcome to Cultural Catalyst, where we help you learn how to live fully alive, co-labor with God, and change the world. And I am your host, Kris Vallotton. And I am, it says thrilled right here. I'm not thrilled, but I am honored to have Bob Hasson, who's been my friend for many, many years on our show. And Bob, I am going to read this. Bob wears many, many hats. Successful businessman. He's an author, podcast host, and a consultant. He's the founder and CEO of HPCI. I didn't know what that stands for. A national commercial painting company that's been thriving since '78 and under your leadership. And beyond the business world, Bob's also spent decades, and this part I know well, as a valued consultant and also helped with a lot of churches, even with our church and also Jesus Culture. And you guys are helping with the church plant there in Jesus Culture in San Diego. So you've got a lot of hats in that. And you've written a book called Shortcuts. That's another book I haven't finished, but I have started. The Proven Path to Purpose, Excellence, and Calling. Hey, so thanks for being on.
Thanks for having me. I'm really honored.
Yeah, I love you so much. Hey, let's talk a little bit about your background. Just give us an overview so people have an understanding of who we're talking to. And gosh, your connection to the church goes way back, even to the days of, if anyone would know Lonnie Frisbee. You were friends with Lonnie Frisbee, which we've had some very interesting dialogues about that. But you've just been you've been a business guy that's been a part of the church for just absolutely decades.
Yeah, Kris, the Lord found me in 1978 at Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. I got baptized at Pirates Cove the same year I started my business.
Wow.
It was a sort of an important year, and I'm really not smart enough. I've done the same business my entire life for almost 45 years.
Wow.
And I'm a commercial painting contractor. HPCI stands for Hasson Painting Contractors, Inc. Just FYI.
Yeah, that's pretty deep. That's deep.
I know it's deep. But the deep part of my life is I've been married to Lauren for 36 years, and she's the most amazing person. We have 4 kids, 2 boys, 2 girls, and 2 grandkids. And so I'm just like the luckiest guy in the world.
You and your wife is she's as crazy as you are. We are good friends. Yeah, in your book Shortcuts, you describe the biggest problems with the world's stance on the path to success, like the way the world views success and the way the kingdom should be viewing success. Share a few. What are the contrasts and what are the flaws in? We got a lot of believers who become business people, right? And yet they actually enter business with the wrong core values, or we'll say the world's core values. What do you see as the difference, and how would you adjust that?
Well, I think in every area of our life, Kris, Jesus is our secret sauce.
Yeah.
And if we can just utilize him in every area of our life, but what I see with business people, believers will be in business and they'll hang their Christian hat at the door on the way to work, and they go to work and they act like the world.
Yeah.
And I think being compartmentalized is one of the main issues that we have in our walk of faith. And if we can incorporate our walk of faith in every area of our life, I think we're going to do better. So how does that play out? Well, people in businesses are they're operating with fear instead of love. In other words, I'm in an environment at work where I can steal ideas, I can climb over your back. There's all these different things I can do, and it's not kingdom principles. So, one of the things I love about you talking about being a cultural catalyst is kingdom principles. What we need to bring into our jobs. 98% of us, over 98% of us work in the marketplace outside of the church. And so there's a whole slew of us who have to be looking at what does it mean to operate under kingdom principles.
What scriptures what scriptures come to mind when I ask you, like, what scriptures are guiding some of your principles in business? Like, what things, we're talking about kingdom principles, obviously coming from the scripture. How are you practically applying the scripture to your everyday life, and especially in the area of business?
Well, I deal with anxiety, and I deal with shame, and I deal with all these things that I've worked through, over the years. And early in my life, in my business life, the Lord gave me Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Acknowledge him in all your ways. Lean not into your own understanding. He'll direct your paths. Well, I apply that specifically to business. Instead of trust the Lord with all your heart, I'll say something like, trust the Lord with this litigation that you're dealing with. Lean not into my own understanding. I make it specific. And this is a scripture everyone knows, but this is a scripture that I use in my life and in my business over and over and over again, because I feel like, being a type A personality, being a Enneagram 8, being a DISC D, I'm going to always try to control something. So I'm always taking a step back. And when I talk to people, Jeremiah 29:11 always comes up to me. For I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord, for a hope and a future. And I think people need to get that. I think people need to understand that that God can give them courage and has their back. So those are the two scriptures that I readily stand on in my life and in my business.
Have you ever, I know you have, so describe a time when, you wanted one thing and, you wanted, and the Lord wanted another. And you know how we get in these conflicts, like, I want to kill this guy, I want to sue this guy. I want to fire this guy. And the Lord intervenes in your heart, and you're like, okay, maybe this is supposed to have a different outcome.
So I'm going to tell you a story. We were painting the new Stanford Hospital a number of years ago, and we got into a big multi-million-dollar plane. And it came to a head, and my team and I flew up to Palo Alto. We went into a conference room with the general contractor, the owner's representatives, the owner, and mediators. And we sat down, and in the opening remarks, the owner's rep went ballistic. He started yelling. He told the general contractor they were the worst general contractor in the world. They told us we were the worst painting contractor in the world. He started yelling and screaming and cussing. I am sitting there, and I get into this where I start shaking. Like, I've got two options.
Are you shaking because you're mad, or are you shaking because you're scared?
Both. The first option is to go over the table and throttle the guy.
Yeah.
The second option, because my father was yelled a lot and was abusive. Me getting yelled at brings all that stuff up. So I thought I was going to cry.
Yeah.
And then as I was trying to figure out what to do, the Lord said, you can do this. And so I heard his voice, and I said to this guy, Joe, my team and I came up here in goodwill. I will not participate in a disrespectful conversation. if you'd like to resolve this if you'd like to resolve this dispute, that's why we're here. But my team and I are going to go outside for 15 minutes. And we'll come back. And if you want to resolve the dispute, that's fine. So we walked out. We were all shaking. My team's like, F those guys. You know what? Let's get on the plane and go. And I said, no, we're going to go back in, which we did. Before I even sat down, Joe said, Bob, will you forgive me? I don't operate this way. I've been under a tremendous amount of pressure.
Wow.
And I said, well, of course. And 10 minutes later, we had a favorable settlement.
Wow.
And so the reason I tell this, it's such an amazing story. The reason I tell the story is because I had been practicing hearing God's voice for a lot of years, not in tense times. And so what happened to me in a tense time, I was able somehow, when I thought I only had two options, to hear his voice and then allow him to work on Joe and that whole team to get the dispute resolved.
Yeah, that's an amazing story, and interesting, because when you're outside of the Lord, like when you move outside of His presence, I don't mean theologically He's gone, but you don't sense His presence. It feels like you have limited options, right? But then you get in a situation like, oh, there's a third option, something you didn't think about at all, right?
Right.
And it turns out good. And when you have a few of those, then you get into dispute like that, and you're like, okay, I remember what happened before. I think I'll.
Well, I'm so hard-headed. It takes me a while to remember what happened.
Oh,
Yeah,
man.
You're right.
I'm like that too. What's been some of the biggest challenges that you faced while building your business, and how did you overcome them? Like, you just named one right there. That's pretty huge. But you've been in business for a long, long time, man. So, and business, I think we should just be honest. Like, business is tough, right? Business is tough. It is. It's not easy.
If it was easy, everybody'd be doing it.
Absolutely.
My message as a consultant is, you've got a good idea, you move forward, and you're going to hit headwaters. I mean, Jesus did not promise us that when we accepted Him that we would be rainbows and unicorns and fairies.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, I think sometimes in my life, having Jesus has allowed me to get through these situations where if I didn't have Him, I don't know how I'd get through. But in my business, there's been many, many ups and downs. And one of the things that I think about when you ask that question is, it took 30 years before our business hit its first home run. So in 30 years, it was a single or a double or a triple play, or all these things were happening. It took 30 years before we had a major job go right. And that was in the 2008 housing crisis. We did some jobs that worked out great. And while everybody was going bankrupt and businesses were having a hard time, people kept saying, how's your business? And I kept saying, amazing. And they'd be like, how? And I'd say, God. Do I look like I'm smart enough to be able to be having amazing business through this recession? No, it's all God and God's faithfulness. And I think one of the things that I see is if we continue to see God through all the circumstances, He's faithful to us. Doesn't mean we're always going to be successful.
Totally. Yeah.
I had plenty of friends who, were overnight successes. Or if you look on social media, you see all these influencers or people who are standing in front of their Learjets, and it's like, wow, how did this happen? For me, it took almost 45 years to be an overnight success.
Yeah, God takes a long time to act suddenly.
Yeah. Right.
Bob, do you think that we've never actually had this conversation, this part of the conversation? Do you think that was because there was things you needed to learn? Or do you think that's just the natural momentum of, being faithful and longevity, and your reputation gets better and better, and more people know you, and then, you get bigger, in your case, you get bigger and bigger jobs, and the chance for higher profits are in these, these larger jobs. Do you think it's that, or do you think there was something you had to learn, or did you not have faith to actually bid on the larger jobs, or why do you think took so long? You think that's just a normal process?
That's an interesting question, Kris. I've always been on larger jobs.
Yeah.
We've been turned down early in our life, early in our business career, because we didn't have the financial wherewithal to be able to get bonded to get the bigger jobs we were getting. And I think God was protecting me. In my case, he showed me how to build a business over time. And one of the things that Lauren and I have always been really, really faithful in is generosity.
Yeah.
And so as the business has grown, we've continued to be generous. And I can't prove it, but the Bible's replete with scriptures on tithing. But I think the reason that we were able to make it through all these years is because of the faithfulness towards God's church and generosity, which I think is a really, really amazing part of God's plan.
Yeah, when you look back, I'm sure, like everyone that's done anything, you have some regrets, some things you would do differently. Is there anything that stands out? People ask me this question because I'm ancient, and they're like, "Hey, what would you tell your younger self?" I'm like, I don't remember. I don't remember. But is there any major lessons that you learned that you would love to go back and revisit in your business life or personal life, really?
I think looking back in my business, when I was an infant company, I would work for anybody who'd take me.
Yeah.
And when I became an adolescent, I got cocky and thought, well, if the next guy can do it for this price, I can do it for that price because I'm smarter than them. And I went through a season of building relationships with general contractors and then saying, well, if my competitor can do it for that price, I'll match it. And coincidentally, every one of those jobs we lost money on. And so the thing that I've learned is, my price is my price. And maybe a point or two I could negotiate, but not any more than that. And that's one thing. It's really, I've learned it's really, really hard to say no to good things.
Yeah.
And in our personal life, that goes true. There's so many good things out there that people ask you to do, and you can't do them all. And so it's wisdom says you're going to have to say no to good things and be okay with it. And people are going to have to understand that.
Yeah. Sometimes it's hard to know what's the good thing, right? And what's the God thing? Like, what door did God open? And what door is an open door that, is, you knocked enough and the person finally said, fine, I'm opening the door, but it's not really the one you should go through, right?
Yeah. Saying that about 15 years ago, the Lord started speaking to me and saying, will you say yes to me? Now, I've been a Christian for 3 decades.
Yeah.
And I started like, well, what do you mean? My whole life is yes to you. And he kept asking me this to the point where I was getting a little frustrated with him and like, am I in sin? Is there something going on? And then he reframed the question and said, if people that you love, honor, and care about ask you to do something, will you say yes? And that put, flesh and skin on the bones of the question. And I really had to think about it. And because of my background, my initial thought was, well, if it's somebody who likes me, they're probably not going to ask me to do something to try to embarrass me or make me look stupid.
Yeah.
And so after this process, I said yes. And what do you think happened? Like, all my friends started asking me to do things that were outside of my wheelhouse that I had never done before, that I wasn't good at. And God stretched me that way to bring me, into a deeper yes with him.
Wow. You wrote this book around business, and you're also consulting. I realize you're not trying to build your consulting business. You're buried. But what are the most common pitfalls that you see? And in your book, you talk about some of those pitfalls. Let's talk about a few of those pitfalls that you see. What are the most common ones that you just run into with, guys you're consulting with, and chapters in the book that you spoke about some of these things?
Well, young people expect to get rich and be a millionaire by the time they're 25.
Yeah.
And before I got on social media, in 2017, I couldn't understand why they kept telling you this. And I kept saying, where did you hear that? Because, the Gallup poll says the average age of a millionaire is 56. So once I got on social media and started seeing the highlight reels, I understood what our younger generations are dealing with, actually, that there's this myth out there that everybody's doing better than them. So hence the name shortcuts. There aren't really any shortcuts.
Yeah.
Like, God can do anything. I've had a bunch of orthopedic surgeries. God's never healed me in the front of a church, but he's healed me by a surgeon and physical therapy and time.
Yeah. In
my business, I didn't get rich quick. And I'm not saying I'm rich. I just didn't get rich quick.
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to say is it takes time. And in the book Shortcuts, I talk about the journey of purpose, the process. We have to be willing to enter into the process with God.
Yeah.
And let him direct our paths. There's chapter 5 is one of my favorite chapters. The title is, Do You Deserve Passion?
Oof.
Because I hear young people say, hey, I'm just not passionate about this job. And when you started in the gas station and I started in my Volkswagen Bug as a painter, there was no passion there. We have to provide for a family.
Yep.
And, but I know that in this younger generation, it's a different place. So I'm trying to help them understand, like, passion can be part of your life. It just might not be associated to your work until you become really proficient. Malcolm Gladwell writes in his book about the 10,000 hour rule.
Yeah.
We become experts at 10,000 hours. Well, if you mathematically take that, there's the 2,040 work hours in a year.
Yeah.
So if you worked full time at playing the guitar or doing whatever you were passionate about, it would take you 5 years to become an expert and proficient. And I think people don't want to hear about the journey, but it's the truth in my life and your life and others' lives also.
I was listening to an interview, and also I read the same quote it might have been in that same book, where they were interviewing Paul McCartney and about the Beatles band, the Beatles. And he made the statement. He said, we went to Germany, in Hamburg, Germany, and we played 365 straight days. And I think they played like 3 times a day. And he said, we were terrible when we got to Germany, and we were great when we left, as a band. Just what you're saying, like, it just takes time, right? Takes time to get in, to build a rhythm and to actually get proficient at whatever it is that you do.
And I'm not saying that if you're young, you can't have wild success, because I've seen plenty of young people. As a matter of fact, you just had my friend Brian Ellis on.
Yeah.
He's a young man and having great success, and I celebrate that. It's just, for me and for lots of other people I know, it's been a process and a journey.
Let's talk about what is success, because I think that's another challenge, right? Because if success is only about outcomes, and God has the ultimate control over the outcome, which we know as older men that's true, and you can work your butt off and make no money, and you can be faithful, and as you pointed out, like, there can be a miracle, or, like, I'd say that's Brian Ellis's story. He has this idea, and I think, like, year 3, his business did like $100 million and made massive profits, and it was just, it was just a miracle. But the outcomes, I don't know how responsible we are for outcomes, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, you asked me about success, and I come back to this. Our identity is that we're loved sons and daughters of God. And as soon as we can understand that we are loved sons and daughters of God, then the outcome or the performance goes away. Because I could end up life in prison, or I could end up a trillionaire, and it wouldn't make any difference to God, because I would be his loved son. So I think people need to step back and recognize that God hung on the cross for the remission of our sins. And by grace, we're saved. And here we are now trying to perform for him when in fact, if we rest in our identity that we're sons and daughters, it gives us the ability to move forward. To me, success doesn't have anything to do with money. It doesn't have anything to do with raises or bonuses. It doesn't have anything to do with the position you are in life. It has to do with how are you affecting lives of the people that you love and that love you and your community.
I'll ask you this last question. It's a tough question. Man, woman's in business. Things are tough. They've got a lot invested. When do you know to quit?
Kris, you know I'm a covenant person. And so if you isolate, you'll never know when to continue or to quit. And so my answer to that is to be with people who love you and who you trust, and you be in the journey and the process with them, having people praying for what really is happening. Now, if you're in a technical business where you're worried about your stock price and you're going to need to have a group of advisors to help you understand, like, it's time to go bankrupt or it's time to quit. But it's always with a group of people. And I think being isolated is the number one disease, if you will, for leaders. When they get isolated, things happen. I can't answer other than make sure that you're surrounded with people and you're talking to people and you're going through your process.
I completely agree. And I think that having a team of wise people that you're accountable to, that are outside of the emotional, energy of your business, right? And because you got your employees, you got your suppliers, you got your customers, and you got your family, who are all emotionally involved it can be in these decisions, right? And having a trusted, team of people, let's just call them friends, that are wise and that you can sit with and say, here's my situation, what would you do? Who are detached from all of the emotion of it and all the fears of, if I make this decision, this is the worst thing that's going to happen. That brings me anxiety. And sometimes I'm kind of in the situation where I'm going to do what creates the least anxiety, which has the least fear attached to it. And maybe that's not the right decision to make. Yeah.
Right. I mean, you talk about fear and it's debilitating. And, I deal with it, and every other business person I know deals with it. And by having a group of friends around you, advisors, whatever the word you want to use, is really, really important. It's been important in my life.
Yeah, it's important in my life. And the worst decision I ever made in business was made against the advice of my two friends. We actually had a business covenant relationship. They were in the trust banking business, and I was in the auto parts business, and we met every week and just talked about each other's business. And the last thing I ever did in business was against both of their counsel. They're like, this is not a good thing. You're not ready for this. And I didn't listen to them. And what's really beautiful in the end of that story is they were absolutely right. It absolutely cost me a ton of money. I had trouble making payrolls. They came over and said, hey, we're going to help you make your payrolls. They made my payrolls. I paid them back every penny without interest, and they never even asked for the money back. But, that's a true friend. They tell you not to do it. You do it anyway, and they're like, we're still with this bozo. We're still with this bozo. So I'm asking every guest this question, which I actually forgot to ask you. What do you believe it takes, and what's it mean to be a cultural catalyst?
Well, I wrote a book with our friend Danny Silk called Business of Honor, which was based on his book, Culture of Honor.
Yeah.
And so I believe in building culture. And so everywhere I go, I'm trying to build a team and build culture that's based on love, not fear. 1 John 4:19 says, love can't coexist with fear because fear has to do with punishment. So what does it mean to me to be a cultural catalyst? Is to be the catalyst of building a culture that's based on love. As simple as that. And it has to have boundaries. And yes, I'm a businessman, and people get fired and people get reprimanded and all these different things happen.
Yeah.
But that's my goal, is to build a culture, to build a culture and be the catalyst in building that culture. And Jesus, of course, is at the top.
How do you do that? Like, give a couple of practical steps. I understand you're not going to, read the book, right? Read the book, but ultimately, you didn't write an entire book because you can say it in 3 lines. But what are a couple of ideas on how you would build a culture of honor inside a business? We're talking about business right now.
Well, in my office right now, there's no believers. I love each one of them. Every day I go in, I sit down in front of their desk and say, hey, how was the weekend, or what's going on? Tell me about I know all about their families. I have invested into them because I'm bent towards the Father. They're seeing the Father through me. And so one of the ways that I build a culture is by caring for people, holding them accountable, but caring for them. And, these people will take a bullet. They'll work overtime. They'll travel out of town. They'll do things that are not convenient for them because of the fact that I pay them above industry standard. And they know that my heart is for them. And I think that gets back to the essence of the gospel. And that's what my goal is just to bring the gospel, whether I'm using words or not.
That's really powerful. Yeah, and there's no way that you still don't have to confront people, at times, reprimand them at times. And I think it's more about how you do it than the fact that you do it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. My model for feedback is asking questions. So most of the time, people do not know they're being confronted when I'm giving them feedback, because I'm asking them questions. And the questions lead to discussion. And I end up getting, the answers I want, or finding out what the problem was. By asking questions. When everything in my mind wants to say, why did you do such a stupid thing? And saying something like, can you help me understand why you made that decision? And it foments conversation. And the conversation is what I'm looking for, because I'm not looking to point blame. I'm looking to resolve a problem 99% of the time. And that is, again, coming back to cultural catalysts. I don't want to put people on the defense. I want people to be, free and open.
That's a really good principle right there. Something I should have used yesterday, actually. Why did we do such a stupid thing? Can you tell me why you did such a stupid thing? No,
let me help you again. All right. I know this is foreign to you, but can you help me understand why you made that decision?
Oh, that's how it works. Okay. That will probably take a little practice with me. It's not.
I'll send you some notes.
You got read the book. Okay. Speaking of reading the book, how do we get shortcuts? How do we get, it's called Business of Honor? No, what's the name of the book?
Business of Honor is what I wrote with Danny in 2017.
Yeah.
Shortcuts you can get on Amazon. You could go to bobhasson.com. But I think Amazon's the easiest way to get it. And then I'm really active on Instagram. So at Bob Hasson, or I think just look for the guy with gray hair. I sure appreciate you having me on, Kris.